Thanks to the current indie scene, fun, innovative, often somewhat experimental titles are now as abundant as ever, with there being a cornucopia of crazy titles out there that are completely different from the AAA offerings we have on the market. While this is certainly the case now, on the whole, during the days of the PS2 and Nintendo Gamecube, we had far less niche options available. However, this didn't mean that there wasn't any weird greatness that could be found. Nothing, in my opinion, fits this category better than that of the fantasticness we shall be covering today. As while this one may look like a stylistic modern offering available to be played on Steam and the Nintendo Switch, instead it was released on home consoles over 20 years ago, way before stuff like this could be considered in any way on vogue. So with all of this said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the story of Capcom's Viewtiful Joe, a criminally underrated game which was ahead of its time that desperately deserves your respect. Yeah. The Nintendo Gamecube, the purple cube of wonder and merriment, released the same week as Microsoft's inaugural Xbox in the United States. This console, Nintendo's first foray into making a CD-ROM based home gaming machine, is remembered as an underperforming platform of the period, but one with an incredible legacy. While developers like Nintendo would make some true bangers for the console, even beginning franchises like Pikmin and Luigi's Mansion that continue to this day, its partnership with third parties would in some cases function as great assets too. This includes working with Sega on an F-Zero game that's still held in high regards to this day, and of course Capcom. Yes, that same company who have given us Street Fighter 2 and many other arcade hits over the 16-bit era. This arcade giant found its fortunes change at the turn of the century, as while Street Fighter 2 had become a domineering release that would shape the arcade landscape for years, they had fallen by the wayside with the releases of rivals Virtua Fighter and Tekken, which would fully embrace 3D graphics. So while things were going far from perfect in the arcades, on the home front, new franchises like Resident Evil and Dino Crisis had slowly grown to prominence and acclaim. However, it must be said, most of this success was found on the Sony PlayStation, and when it came to Nintendo, the Nintendo 64 only received 3 titles. Magical Tetris Challenge, a licensed Tetris adventure using Mickey Mouse characters, an impressive port of Resident Evil 2, shoving the multi-disc game into a single cartridge, and Mega Man 64, a port of the Mega Man Legends inaugural title that people are still clamouring for a third entry in the series of to this day. If you're old enough to recall the early years of the PS2, Gamecube and original Xbox generation, you may be able to remember that the early offerings for the hardware were thin to say the least, and outside of perhaps Grand Theft Auto 3 and Halo, most video games weren't much different from before, they just featured better graphics. Capcom would even go as far to acknowledge this in a press conference held in Japan in November 2002, an event that would take place about a year after the launch of the Gamecube. At the time, they would state, "In an industry where you create to amuse and entertain, do you sense a crisis about the industry's continuing regression of excitement and new stimulation? We believe that the regression of excitement is solely the fault and responsibility of we creators. By the same token, we believe it is our mission and responsibility to create something that is worth seeing for the user. In a market that has become prosaic with character development games and sequel games, we would like to take this opportunity to announce 5 new and exciting games for Gamecube." So with Capcom announcing to the world that they were planning to mix things up and try something new, what would these 5 titles be, you may ask? Well, there was Killer 7, the psychological action game about a world of assassins, and a big entry of the catalogue of Goichi Suda, who is commonly known as Suda51 of No More Heroes fame. This would be developed at Grasshopper Manufacturer. The following 4 titles would be developed by Capcom Production Studio 4, headed up by Resident Evil 1's director Shinji Mikami, acting as supervisor. One of these titles was PNO3, a third-person shooter focusing on a robot battle on a space colony. But perhaps most notably, Gamecube owners would also be the first to receive Resident Evil 4, the iconic survival horror action game that brought the franchise into the modern era by ditching pre-rendered locales and the more action-inspired gameplay, and even largely ditching the zombies that had been a mainstay of the previous titles. And in this lineup we also had Dead Phoenix, I can't say much about Dead Phoenix as the game never made it to fruition, But if you'd like to hear more about the mysterious missing member of this Capcom quintet, let me know in the comments below. So now let's talk about the last of this fearsome fivesome, the hero of our tale, Viewtiful Joe. Released in June 2003, this cult favourite would be directed by none other than Hideki Kamiya of Devil May Cry and Resident Evil 2 fame, and eventually Okami. You know, the same eccentric creator who uses Twitter to block anyone who has the audacity to speak to him in English, who he likes to refer as insects. In more recent history, he can be credited as the genius behind the likes of the wonderful 101 and the amazing Bayonetta franchise. But before all of this, we had Viewtiful Joe. Presented as a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up, this almost forgotten classic heavily embraced both cel-shaded visuals and 2.5D graphics, resulting in an experience that was largely unique at the time. This meant not only did this game massively stand out from everything else that was available on the market in 2003, but if you place this in the hands of an 18-year-old TikToker, it's highly unlikely that they would be able to identify that this isn't a modern game. Aesthetically, the title has aged gracefully, and it would not look at all out of place running on a PS5. Looking at GTA 3 and Viewtiful Joe side by side, only one of these games still looks good in modern day. When it comes to 2.5D graphics, this stylistic choice is common now, with it appearing in everything from Super Mario Wonder to Street Fighter 6. Games which use 3D rendered characters on 2D planes helps keep classic gameplay elements in play, with developers now not needing to rely on sprites with this method, also allowing for a bit of visual depth. While Viewtiful Joe was far from the first game that could be experienced in such dimensions, this was perhaps the most beautiful the world had seen yet. During the developmental phase for this game, Viewtiful Joe was initially conceptualized under the working title Red Hot Man. However, it is said that this moniker faced a swift alteration due to copyright clashes with the renowned American rock band the Red Hot Chili Peppers. The inception of Viewtiful Joe marked the collaboration of an initial team comprising of 6 talented individuals who embarked on the ambitious journey of creating this captivating game within a strict 12-month time frame. However, as the intricate process of game development unfolded, the demands and scope of the project necessitated an expansion in the team's size. Consequently, the development team grew in numbers, accommodating additional creative minds and skilled professionals. As the project grew and grew, development time was expanded from a 12-month window to a 21-month period, allowing for an end product that was far more polished and refined than what would have been possible if Capcom had chosen to LJN or Ubisoft this one. The evolution of the team and the prolonged development period ultimately contributed to this game's great quality. Playing this one, there is no doubt that Viewtiful Joe reeks of charm, with one look at this game immediately causing many gamers to conjure up nostalgic memories of the Power Rangers, with the franchise's action footage of course being licensed and repurposed from the Japanese Super Sentai show. Viewtiful Joe, in its home country of Japan, was obviously a love letter to the entire tokusatsu genre as a whole, which might have you asking,
what the hell is even that?
For a quick breakdown, the word tokusatsu loosely translates to special effects, and is commonly used as the name of the works that heavily embrace it from Japan. While gaining significant ground internationally with the release of Godzilla, modern interpretations of the concept would be heavily tied to the works of Shotaro Ishinomori, a Japanese comic creator who created 2 franchises that still run to this day, Kamen Rider and of course Super Sentai. Fun fact, he did the Legend of Zelda comic that Nintendo Power ran too. For those like myself who grew up watching the Fox Kids network, you may remember Kamen Rider becoming the Master Rider. Speaking of this Japanese superhero, the original actor Hiroshi Fujioka is the same man who played Sagata Sanshiro. You know, the same lunatic you might constantly see in retro gaming related videos that have anything to do with the Sega Saturn. Looking at Viewtiful Joe, you see a lot of similarities between this game's protagonists and those featured in the classic Japanese shows, with Joe providing a good hybrid or homage to these tight clothing wearing weirdos. Joe appearing in a red spandex suit with a flowing pink scarf itself is a direct reference to the original Kamen Rider's muffler. Our hero transformed into his beautiful persona early in the game, and begins fighting monsters that have come out of the movie he's watching with his girlfriend at the beginning of the title. In this game's plot, Joe and Sylvia are attending a tokusatsu film, starring their favourite hero, Captain Blue. But when Blue is defeated, the villain of the movie reaches out and steals Sylvia, forcing Joe to enter Movieland himself to save the day. When he gets the V-Watch, his hero transformation device, he shouts, "Henshin a go-go, baby!" and becomes Viewtiful Joe. While this might sound like he is speaking Chinese to the players at home, Henshin is simply Japanese for transform, and would be what most Kamen Riders shout out when transforming, and is basically another version of "It's Morphin' Time!" Contributing to this game's uniqueness, throughout his adventure in Movieland, Joe uses special attacks known as Viewtiful effects, bringing the sort of camera trickery seen in tokusatsu films to life. This means he can slow time down to decimate enemies with stronger attacks and quicker reflexes, speed up time to create after images like a Street Fighter Alpha V'ism, and zoom into the action to give him new, more powerful attacks, which subsequently make him more susceptible to damage too. The game's producer, Atsushi Inaba, who today serves as the CEO of PlatinumGames, was interviewed by GameSpy back in 2005. The article outlines that what helped Viewtiful Joe stand out is that while it was originally conceived as a basic beat-em-up, the game ventured into the risk zone before its designers stumbled upon the game's defining feature, the VFX powers. Those who have delved into the game can attest to the distinctive experience these powers provide, such as the ability to slow down or speed up the action. That same year, Gamer Sutra would also retrospectively highlight Viewtiful Joe's development, with them reporting Inaba stating, at the time of the game's release, that players were getting tired of the same old thing. But since it was easy to stick to with what works, this is why we get so many rehashes, established genres or themes in gaming, but with him ultimately believing that this production style can be self-destructive. He adds that truly fresh ideas need time to be nurtured or projects fail, comparing this process to watering a seed. Adding Viewtiful Joe was a project designed to increase the skill of the game's director, Hideki Kamiya. Inaba believes the VFX system in the game was the seed that deserved to be nurtured and given extra time to grow into a beautiful tree, or in this game's case, a beautiful tree. This is why development time got extended from 12 months to 21. Speaking with Game Bunker in 2006, Inaba would address Viewtiful Joe's novel for its time graphical style, commenting that it is very possible for more 2D games to come out, but it will all depend on how creative the game creators can be with them. If you can make a game like Viewtiful Joe that's stylistic and fun, then sure, there could be lots more 2D games out there. However, very few people are able to implement that kind of style and fun to make it seem original. In the same interview, Inaba would lambast the game industry for repeatedly pumping out exactly the same kind of stuff, noting that right now there are no games that I want to play. And I love games a lot, but there is nothing of interest because it all looks the same, so I was really happy to get to produce a game like Viewtiful Joe that's fresh and new. I don't really care if people want to think I'm strange, crazy or whatever. I've made fun, unique and original games, and if that's going to mean that I get labelled as a crazy weird creator, well, label me. Building on the bountiful bonanza that is Viewtiful Joe, we can't talk about this game without acknowledging the bosses, as in my opinion they are integral in the game's appeal and should be celebrated. All bosses boast creative designs that are a blend of traditional superhero tropes, humour and absurdity. Beyond their visual appeal, each one also has distinct personalities and quirks. Whether through dialogue, animations or unique attacks, each boss fight stands out, adding depth to the game's narrative and making encounters more engaging. I must comment at points that this game is really difficult, with the challenging gameplay of Viewtiful Joe functioning as a hallmark of the experience, with a crucial aspect of this being the boss encounters. Each boss requires players to learn and adapt to specific patterns and attacks, providing a sense of accomplishment when successfully defeating them. Speaking of which, if anything has indeed dated this game, it is how difficult this one is compared to the spoon-fed easiness that we are provided with practically every modern game now. Even the easy mode of this game can be very tough. Upon release, outlets like GameSpot would rave about the title. They would comment that the bottom line is that Viewtiful Joe is a really impressive achievement. It manages to simultaneously recall the simpler times of 2D platforming action games while modernising the genre in several major ways. It pulls off its stylized gameplay without compromising the rest of the game for the sake of a few flashy moves and ideas. It also has an incredible look to it and enough depth and enough extras to keep you playing after you finish the game once through. In short, those looking for something new and exciting in action gaming should definitely add Viewtiful Joe to their collection. The game would be critically praised on Metacritic. It features a 93% critical rating and an 8.0 based on users. it would receive multiple GameCube Game of the Year awards. 1UP.com and USA Today would reward the title with this status, and IGN would state, "The battle for Game of the Year on GameCube was a tough one. Matt begged and pleaded for Prince of Persia to claim the title, but since Mary Jane was not enthralled with the title, Joe took the crown. Why did Joe beat the Prince? Well, Viewtiful Joe nails everything that truly makes the game fun. Whether it be graphics, gameplay or lasting appeal, it sparkles with originality. The whole world acts as a single organism. Everything makes sense in terms of the game's laws. Sparkling with originality, Joe has such great play mechanics that are integrated into everything you do. Even the gimmicky powers are legitimised because they're so integral to the game and masterfully worked into the environmental puzzles. The stellar gameplay combined with an original style, Viewtiful Joe more than deserves the Game of the Year award on GameCube. Despite the love for the title and a sellout of the initial 100,000 batch, it would only see a lifetime total of 275,000 units. Capcom would mention in an annual stockholder report that this wasn't their only disappointment, as Dino Crisis 3 for the Xbox performed weaker than expected, and Resident Evil Outbreak's delay pushed it into another fiscal year. Presumably due to these poor sales, or due to the praise that Viewtiful Joe, Killer 7 and Resident Evil 4 would receive, the titles would eventually see ports to the PlayStation 2, and years later find themselves on some modern consoles and Steam. Joe himself would get a direct follow-up, Viewtiful Joe 2, Red Hot Rumble and Double Trouble. An animated series would air in Japan and be released on DVD in America, and while that would be the last time Joe took a starring role, he would make playable appearances in both Tatsunoko vs Capcom Ultimate All-Stars and Marvel vs Capcom 3 Fate of Two Worlds, as well as Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3. Hell, he'd even show up in Archie Comics' World Unite crossover, pitting the worlds of Sonic the Hedgehog versus that of Mega Man, rapidly expanding into the Sega and Capcom multiverses. In fact, the turbulent Wind himself, Rashid, would gain a costume to represent him in Street Fighter V, and PlatinumGames would later develop the Wonderful 101, which would share the same tokusatsu influences, and even confirm that Sylvia would be a Wonder cheerleader in this adventure. So through all of these references, we can see that Viewtiful Joe has never truly been gone, and fingers crossed he will return one day to save Japan and the world from cookie cutter modern tripe once more. Viewtiful Joe delivers a criminally underrated experience that looks and feels like it was created today, not a title from the era of ugly games like Grand Theft Auto 3. This is why you should respect this game. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, I wrote this alongside my friend Chad, who has an awesome video on tokusatsu. Check this out via a link in the pinned comments, or why not check out another one of my videos on an old Capcom game that deserves your respect. Yeah, cheerio.